Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So it has been quite a while since I did an author spotlight. I think the last one I did was Adam Neville. But I, to this day, still get a lot of people watching my author spotlight on Darcy Coates. So I decided I needed to do another spotlight on a really strong female voice in the horror lit world. And that is, of course, Ania Ahlborn. I have been reading Ania Ahlborn's work now, I want to say for 2 years. It really hasn't been that long, but I have devoured a whole lot of her bibliography in that time period, because she has just become one of those authors that I feel so compelled to read. She writes a very, very unique horror story, even if it's heavily influenced by something that is very, very common in the horror community. I love her attention to detail on familial horror. I love her choice to push to extreme boundaries and talk about really extreme topics and write stories that don't traditionally have happy endings, but to still have this kind of restrained voice where what you're reading is never too far, and it's all very thought-provoking and it's all very consequential. And I just absolutely love her writing. If you have not heard of Ania Ahlborn, she grew to popularity in, I want to say, like 2012. She was originally born in Poland, but she shortly moved to America and actually self-published her very first novel, very much like Darcy Coates did. However, for her self-published debut novel, which I actually have right here, Seed, which is arguably her most famous novel at this point, it did extremely well. Like, extremely well for a self-published unknown author. And kind of blew up her career. It gave her basically the stepping stones to have released all of the novels that she has since. Since then, she has released 9 novels, with a 10th one coming out. She does actually have a new release in 2024. I know that wasn't on my most anticipated releases list, but it's because I learned about it literally today while I was putting this video together. So I'm going to talk about that towards the end, but it is called Good and Joyful Things. And on top of her 9 novels, and soon to be 10, she's also released 3 novellas, out of which I have read 1 of the 3. I've read 6 of her full-length novels, though. Yeah, 6 of her full-length novels and 1 of her novellas. So I'm getting through the vast majority of her work, and I've just become such a huge fan. But like I was saying earlier, what I love that she does is she typically writes horror based on the family unit. Relationships in which the average person would probably feel safe with, relationships with your mother, your father, your children, your brothers. And she kind of flips them on their head. So even though a lot of her stories do also focus on this kind of supernatural element, the real horror that you find with the stories that she's telling all derive from something rooted in reality. What happens when this loved one, this person you trust, is not actually what they seem? What happens when their values don't align with yours? What happens when there's the sinister evil that you choose to overlook because of who that person is in relationship to you? And I love that about her work. I'm just going to give you guys kind of an overview on her books. I've done these author spotlights before, and I feel like I'm always kind of not quite sure how to navigate them. But I've been reading so much Ania Ahlborn that I really think I'm just going to talk through the books that I have read from her. I don't dislike any of them. Kind of give you my 2 cents on them and let you guys decide where you want to start with them. So let's start with Seed. This was actually the 2nd novel I ever read from Ania Ahlborn. Well, it's technically the 1st. The first thing I ever read from her was Palmetto, which I received in a Nightworms package. That package did wonders for me because it introduced me to both Ania Ahlborn and Christopher Triana. But for this purpose, we're going to start with Seed. This is a novel I had seen in like Barnes & Noble's like recommended tables for years because I loved the cover. I thought it was so cool and whimsical and dark and just something you wouldn't normally see recommended by Barnes & Noble. The premise is, with nothing left but the clothes on his back and something horrific snapping at his heels, Jack Winter fled his rural Georgia home when he was just a boy, watching the world he knew vanish in a trucker's rearview mirror. He thought he was leaving an unspeakable nightmare behind forever. Now, years later, the bright future he's built suddenly turns pitch black as something fiendishly familiar looms dead ahead. Surviving a violent car crash seems like a miracle for Jack's family, but Jack knows there's nothing divine about it. The profound evil he uncovered as a boy has finally found him again. The thing that crouched at his bedside with soulless eyes and grinning razor-sharp teeth is back with plans for Jack and his angelic youngest daughter, and a chilling promise. I've always been here, and I'll never leave. Now, while I did enjoy this novel, this is, out of all of Ania Ahlborn's stories, the one that's actually stuck with me the least. I know a lot of people say it's their favorite of hers, but for me, it was just a, like, compelling, scary story between a father and a daughter. It really does feel like a debut novel once you know that it is. I feel like when I went into it, I didn't realize it was a debut. I just assumed it was like her best-selling novel, which it is, I believe. But looking back, knowing now what she is capable of, I do believe this to be one of her weaker books. However, as I said earlier, the book that got me into Ania Ahlborn's writing was Palmetto. And again, this is a novella. It's very, very, very short. It's like 100 pages long. And mine's signed, because this was a limited edition released only for Nightworms, which is really, really cool. But this is also very much a tribute to Rosemary's Baby. If you've been on my channel recently, I've done a lot of chatting about Rosemary's Baby, and I recently read Nestlings. And I kind of love this, like, home isn't what it seems aspect of Rosemary's Baby, which is very, very, very present in Palmetto. It's also very present in Within These Walls, which is another Ania Ahlborn book that I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's definitely something that I think is a really, really cool subgenre of the horror world. I think it's something that I'm looking for more and more. I've been saying over the last year how much I love familial horror. Again, Ania Ahlborn is a perfect author for that. And before that, coming-of-age stories have always been my favorite horror genre. But I'm also starting to really love horror in the home when it isn't a haunting. And this is, I'll let you guys read this and decide what this is, but it is very weird is what it is. So the premise for this one is Kim Devlin nearly has it all. A great marriage, a baby on the way. All that's missing is a house. One idyllic enough to fill the Norman Rockwell-shaped spaces in her mind. So when Kim's husband Eddie books a property tour of a home Kim has been eyeing online, it's love at first sight. Far too expensive for them to afford, Kim and Eddie make an offer anyway, and score the deal of a lifetime. The house is suddenly theirs, and Kim sees it as destiny. The house is where they're supposed to raise their baby, joyful and free and full of nothing but the best memories. But homes, especially the perfect ones, are never what they seem. Before Kim and Eddie are even moved in, something begins to squirm beneath Kim's skin. Something pretentious, a warning. Don't buy this house. But she ignores her misgivings as if sensing its mother's foreboding, and the baby begins to squirm beneath Kim's skin as well, twisting, writhing. But Kim ignores that too, blinded by the idea of storybook happiness. Kim barrels headlong into a dream that quickly proves to be anything but, and unwittingly seals her family's diabolical fate. Paying homage to Ira Levine's Rosemary's Baby, Ahlborn's Palmetto takes the classic story of wanting it all and asks, how much would you sacrifice to have what you desire? And, watching your dream become a waking nightmare, how loud would you scream? There are a lot of bugs in this book. I actually don't think I knew what a palmetto was until I read this book, but it's this bug on the cover. This is great. It really does pay homage to Rosemary's Baby without being a direct ripoff. Very similar to the way that Nat Cassidy's Nestlings does. I'm really starting to enjoy that genre of horror. And again, Ania Ahlborn is so good at scary things in familiar spaces. And you're going to see as I continue to read through the premises of these that just, even though it's only 100 pages, it still really gets under your skin. There's some images from that novel that are kind of seared into my brain, and especially the figure in the corner is where I'll leave it. I love the imagery in that story, and I think it's so strong. It just takes, again, a very iconic story and tells it in a very unique and different way. However, most famously for doing that is her 2015 novel, Brother. This was my #1 read of 2023. It's also the first book I read in 2023, so that is how much it stuck with me, that no other book was able to top this. Basically, this is kind of a retelling of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre if it was told through the eyes of one of the members of the family. This is one of the most disturbing books I've ever read. It's also one of the best books I've ever read. Ania Ahlborn, again, is able to infiltrate the family unit, dissect it, make you feel sympathy for people who do not deserve an ounce of it. And just not only get into our characters' heads in new and intriguing ways, but get into our heads as well, manipulating us to feel things that in any other way we shouldn't feel. You will never feel for Leatherface the things that you feel for Michael in this novel, who is our titular character. I'm going to read the back for you. Deep in the heart of Appalachia stands a crooked farmhouse miles from any road. The Morrows keep to themselves, and it served them well so far. When girls go missing off the side of the highway, the cops don't knock on their door, which is a good thing, seeing as to what's buried in the Morrows' backyard. But 19-year-old Michael Morrow isn't like the rest of his family. He doesn't take pleasure in the screams that echo through the trees. Michael pines for normalcy, and he's sure that someday he'll see the world beyond West Virginia. He meets Alice, a pretty girl working at a record shop in the small nearby town of Dahlia. He's immediately smitten. For a moment, he nearly forgets about the monster he's become. But his brother Rebel is all too eager to remind Michael of his place. The premise of this book is very, very mild in explaining what this novel is about. And there's just so many intricate layers to this story that makes it so fantastic to read while also absolutely, truly terrifying. I would not suggest starting Ania Ahlborn's work with this book if you are not into extreme horror. It never got anywhere where I felt I was too uncomfortable to read it. It doesn't push the boundaries in a descriptive sense. A lot of what Ania Ahlborn does is kind of make the reader understand what's happening without having to go into gratuitous detail, which I really, really love. So it is definitely restrained in a sense. You're not going to be reading overly graphic scenes, but you will be very deep in graphic, disturbing content. So just be wary of that. If you're not into extreme horror and you want to branch out into Ania Ahlborn, Brother is not the book to start with. If you're very comfortable with extreme horror, it is. But this is definitely a book to absolutely read once you get into Ahlborn's writing and you've determined that her style is for you. And I have to remind you guys, she doesn't like to write happy endings. She writes very, very brutal endings, and you just need to make sure you're in the right headspace to read that. I don't think I have a single book on the rest of this list with even remotely a happy ending. But I like all of them, and I will highly recommend all of them. You need to be prepared for that. One such book that really does not do the happy ending thing is Dark Across the Bay. And I was blown away by this book because reading it, I did actually think it was going to go in either the kind of happy for everyone ending or like awful and depressing and you feel empty inside kind of ending. Like it was like a real toss-up for it, and I kind of felt like you got both in a weird sense. Like you're not going to feel happy after reading this book. You're absolutely not. But you also won't feel quite as destroyed as you will after reading Brother. So, or The Devil Crept In either. The Devil Crept In really got to me, but I'll talk about that in a second. But Dark Across the Bay is her latest novel. It's her most recent novel. It came out in 2021. But I don't think it really hit the mass paperback market until 2022. She kind of releases some of her stories in like small batches and then later in larger format. But yeah, so this is Dark Across the Bay. I thought this was going to be kind of like a summary read because it's set in like a small island off the coast of Maine, and it's very into the like New England coastal scene. It's not. It's set in fall, which is a very odd setting for what it is, but it really, really works with kind of the isolation of this story. I'm going to read the back for y'all. The house sits stoic and slightly askew off the coast of Ravenshead. Its off-kilter windows are both charming and disorienting, its walls of overstuffed bookshelves both comforting and claustrophobic. When Leo and Lark Parrish arrive at their vacation home with their parents, their mother's idea of a quintessential Maine getaway seems like both a blessing and a curse. Lark, A novice novelist, I love that, can't wait to find inspiration at the end of a fog-entombed pier. She'll forgive her mother for forcing her into this non-negotiable holiday, but only if she can find her muse among a lapping, rocky shore. And while being trapped in a house with no means of escape is the last thing Leo would consider a good time, especially with his parents on the precipice of divorce, he can't help but wonder if maybe the change of scenery will help him shake off the chains of sadness brought on by the death of his closest friend. But what starts off as a relatively benign family trip quickly turns menacing. Leo finds himself face to face with what feels like his best friend reaching out from beyond the grave. And only hours after they arrive, Lark begins to receive sinister texts. And then they both see it. Someone lurking in the shadows of their rental home. Someone who has been expecting them despite the parishes being 1,000 miles from home. I think this is the most concrete story I've read from Ania Ahlborn that focuses on the family unit as a whole. To an extent, Brother does as well, but the title kind of gives away that it's more of a focus on siblings. This really evenly distributes the relationships between husband and wife, mom and children, dad and children, siblings. Like, it's very well rounded with that, and you get a really good look into all members of this family in this kind of like Strangers-esque house break-in style story. I'm going to leave it at that because I think this book really takes you on a ride. I think the setting is also very, very strong. This is one of my favorite settings from Ania Ahlborn. Even though it is primarily in a home, it is a foreign home to our main characters, and it is very, very isolated. However, the setting in itself is also very beautiful, and I really kind of want to go there, except this book has also kind of convinced me to never, ever, ever rent an Airbnb again. I feel like that's another like horror theme that we've been getting. We just got that in Candy Cane Kills, which is a very similar premise to this now that I'm thinking about it, but very, very polar opposite in tone. But yeah, this book was amazing, and this was, I believe, the second thing or it might have been the third. This was one of the earlier books I read from Ania Ahlborn, and it was gut-wrenching. It's, again, not going to be happy. It's difficult topics, difficult concepts, and again, a lot of the horror, actually all of the horror in this book is rooted in reality. It's not supernatural, and the same with Brother. Those actually may be the only ones, those are the only ones I think on this list, though, that are 100% rooted in reality. Ania Ahlborn, again, she can kind of juggle everything. She can do the supernatural, she can do monster in real life kind of thing, and she balances it out very, very well. One of the novels that does a really good job of kind of showing you a nice split down the middle of terror that stems from a supernatural experience and supernatural entities combined with the terror of being human and just facing life and growing up is The Devil Crept In. I would say that this is my second favorite novel that Ania Ahlborn has ever written. I read this right after I read Brother, and I absolutely adored it. This is a novel where we focus on the relationship between children, two cousins who grew up as neighbors as well as best friends, and their kind of questionable relationship due to their familial ties. This book talks in many, many different ways about, do you continue to love somebody because they're your family, even if what they are and what they are doing is wrong? That comes up many, many, many times in many different forms in this story. But I do think that our lead, being, I believe, a 12-year-old boy, is so, so strong. Very sympathetic character, very likable character in a very terrible situation. And I absolutely could not put this book down. I read it so fast. So it says, young Jude Brighton has gone missing, and while the search for him is in full swing here in the small town of Deer Valley, Oregon, the locals are starting to lose hope. They're well aware that the first 48 hours are critical, and after that, the odds usually point to a worst-case scenario. And despite Stevie Clark's youth, he knows that too. He's seen the cop shows. He knows what each ticking moment may mean for Jude, his cousin and best friend. It's just like the stories from years ago of that boy, Max Larson, who was found dead after also disappearing under mysterious circumstances. And then there were the animals, pets gone missing out of yards. For years, the residents of Deer Valley have either murmured about or tried very hard to not talk of these unsolved crimes, or that a killer may still possibly be lurking around their quiet town. Now fear is reborn, and for Stevie, who is determined to find out what really happened to Jude, the awful truth may be too horrifying to imagine. This novel also came out in 2015. The tone and writing style of this is very, very similar to Brother, but it takes a completely different turn. Instead of focusing on a like young adult, we are focusing on children primarily, and we do have some really strong scenes around mothers and their relationship with their children. Brother I find to be more of a gripping story, but this one I feel to be more of an overall heartbreaking story. Again, you are not going to get a happy ending with this novel, but it is a whirlwind and an adventure. It is very supernatural, but done in a very restrained way. You don't feel that the supernatural elements overpower the horror of being a young child in a difficult situation. They are very, very well balanced out, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic read. Definitely the book I would probably recommend starting if you want to get into Ania Ahlborn's writing. It kind of encroaches on some of the extreme scenes that you will see in Brother without kind of going over the edge if you want something a little bit safer. Definitely check out my video review on that story before diving in, just because I talk about some of the trigger warnings that are going to be in there, because there's definitely a lot. There's a lot of trigger warnings in a lot of these books, so again, something just to be aware of. Okay, next up I have 2019's If You See Her. This is one of those novels where it's kind of like with Seed, where I enjoyed it, but it pales in comparison to the rest of Ania Ahlborn's work that I've read. It's just not as strong, and I was a little bummed that it came out after The Devil Crept In and Brother, because I just felt like those were so well-written stories, and this one just felt like it was missing something for me. I'm going to read the back for you guys. Everyone imagines that something terrible lurks within the house's abandoned rooms, especially Jesse and his two closest friends, Casey and Reed. But when Reed chooses the house as a backdrop for his own suicide, childhood ghost stories are transformed into a nightmare that sends Jesse into a downward spiral of grief. Nearly 20 years later, Jesse stands on the collapsing steps of the house that snatched away his best friend. Casey asked him to revisit their old demons, if only to help them find closure that's long overdue. But tragedy finds them once more, and Jesse is left forever changed. Now, left to cope with the disaster that has become his life, Jesse must unravel the mystery behind the house that has terrified him since he was a boy. What I did like about this one is, this is the story that focuses the most, I would say, on, like, chosen relationships versus family ties. We see a lot of questioning of how much does a marriage mean to our main character. We see a lot of questioning of, if you were friends with somebody when you were a child, do they still remain friends with you as an adult? Even if you had met each other now, you wouldn't be associated with one another. I really do appreciate that Ania Ahlborn went for a different direction in approaching her kind of familial horror, but I just found this one to be not as gripping as her other stories. I will say the visuals in this are definitely some of her strongest, and they're really, really sad. This book deals with a lot. This book deals with like a very, very, very heavy attention to detail of suicide, which may be hard for some people to read. It is very, very tragic, and she does handle it in a very tasteful manner, but it is something just to be aware of with this book. It is definitely one of her heavier stories, but also a book that I just felt was missing some of the heart that her other stories have. And then last but not least, we have Within These Walls. Oh, this book is so good. This book is so good because, to me, it is the best depiction of cults I have ever seen in a horror novel. This, to me, shows how an average person can fall into a cult. Reading this, I was like, wow, I kind of want to join that cult. Like, it was so well done, and the love bombing that happens, and the indoctrination, and it was just so believable. At the same time, this is, in a sense, kind of a ghost story. In a really, really weird way. And I don't even know if I want to call it a ghost. Like a legacy haunting? I don't know. Let me read the back of the book for y'all. With his marriage on the rocks and his life in shambles, washed-up true crime writer Lucas Graham is desperate for a comeback. One more shot at the best-selling success he once enjoyed. His chance comes when he's promised exclusive access to death row inmate Jeffrey Halcombe, the notorious cult leader and mass murderer who's ready to break his silence after 30 years, and who contacted Lucas personally from his maximum security cell. With nothing left to lose, Lucas leaves New York to live in and work from the scene of the crime. A split-level farmhouse on a gray sanded beach in Washington state, whose foundation is steeped in the blood of Halcombe's diviners, runaways who were drawn to his message of family, unity, and unconditional love. There, Lucas sets out to capture the real story of the departed faithful. Except that he's not alone, for Jeffrey Halcombe promises devout eternal life, and within these walls, they're far from dead. What I love about this story is it forces the reader to compare parallels of a found family in a cult versus your natural family. And it is paralleled very, very well over different timelines in the same location, and I loved the way Ania Ahlborn set this one up. This is, I think, the longest book I've read from her. It's like 450 pages. I devoured this in like 4 days. I could not put this down. I just needed to know what was happening. For me, the ending is, again, tragic. It is not exceptional compared to some of her others, but the journey to get there is phenomenal. And again, if you are into like cult horror, or if you like true crime in general, this is an amazing fictional telling of that subject matter. It's honestly the strongest telling of any cult that I've read in the horror genre. I think it was phenomenal. She must have done so much research into cults and how they operated, especially, I think they're back in like the 70s, I want to say. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was just so well done. And I absolutely adored this novel. I thought it was very unique for her while still holding on to a lot of her core motifs. Again, you're going to get a lot of familial horror, you're going to get a lot of dysfunctional relationships, but you're going to get it through a whole lot of new ways and through a huge fabrication of family versus, again, the rooted reality of family. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is read the premise of the upcoming novel, Good and Joyful Things. Right now it's available for pre-order on Santa Press, which is a publishing company that releases high-quality, limited edition illustrated versions of books. This one's coming out in a couple months, I want to say. Unfortunately, it retails starting at $125 per copy. I'm not going to spend $125 on a book I've never read before, but later in the year it will be hitting the mass paperback market. So even if you can't get it when it first comes out through Suntop Press, it will be released in mass paperback later, at least according to Ania Ahlborn's website. I don't necessarily love that that's how it's being released, but that's how it's being released. Anyhow, so it says, new novel from the Amazon #1 best-selling author of Brother and Seed, Good and Joyful Things, is Ania Ahlborn's horrifying manifesto of marriage manipulation and the unpredictability of human relationships. So we are getting all of the things that we love about Ania Ahlborn's horror. So it says, Simone and Elliot Evans have it all. A comfortable life, a house on a quiet street, and 2 sweet daughters. But their marriage is far from happy, especially now. When Elliot spends all day at work, postpartum depression presses down hard on Simone's shoulders. Baby Lizzie is colicky and often sick. 4-year-old Aster is a handful, not at all as good a helper as Simone had hoped. The more time Simone spends home alone with the girls, the more she's convinced that Elliot's interest in his family is waning. He's pining for his ex, Leighton Prescott, a woman who mysteriously disappeared from their small New Hampshire town years before, leaving her and Elliot's then newborn daughter, Aster, behind. When Simone confronts Elliot in search of the truth, he reminds her that this isn't the first time she's accused him of being unfaithful, and isn't the first time her assumption has been wrong. But when Simone spots Leighton at the grocery store, that might be Leighton, I'm not sure. Spelled the same way as the actress who plays Blair Waldorf in Gossip Girl. But when Simone spots Leighton at the grocery store in their tiny hometown, she has her proof. Leighton Prescott is back, and despite what Elliot says, Simone knows Leighton will stop at nothing to destroy the life she's built with Elliot, piece by precious piece. Terrified of losing her family, Simone puts Elliot to the ultimate test. He's left with one chance to save the marriage he vowed to preserve. But rather than rekindling the love he and Simone once shared, he instead uncovers an unfathomable truth about the woman he calls his wife. A woman that, as it turns out, he doesn't know at all. With the Good and Joyful Things, Ania Ahlborn tackles the subjects of marriage, using her signature brand of brutality to write a psychological thriller that explores the terrifying secrets that can dwell in even the most intimate relationships. Oh, okay, that's actually the first time I read through that. I waited until filming this video to read it. I am very excited for this. I'm hoping that I will get what I was looking for in If You See Her in this story. This definitely has a lot of those boxes checked that we love to see from Ania Ahlborn, and I'm really, really hoping that I love it as much as I do most of her bibliography. Fun fact, Brother was optioned for a film, I believe back in 2021. It's kind of in who knows where realm right now, but I would love to see that movie adapted, but even more so because I know we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I would love to see The Devil Crept In adapted. I think that would be so terrifying and so well done. I just really love Ania Ahlborn's work. I will pick up anything she writes. I gotta finish reading her back catalog. I'm missing, I think, 3 of her novels so far. Hopefully I'll get through those this year, but definitely an author worth checking out. Definitely a very strong female voice in horror, writing really, really in-depth stuff about families and the horror of realities and relationships. No other author I've seen is doing what she's doing, and I think she has a really unique take and a really unique voice in this realm, and I really, really can't wait to read more from her. Hopefully this video helped you guys kind of navigate where you would want to start with Ania Ahlborn, and if you've been reading her, hopefully it'll show you some more novels that you should pick up from her. Highly, highly recommend her. She is just so fun and fantastic and depraved and scary and just all of the things I want in a really good horror writer. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday. I know I've been posting on Tuesdays recently, so sorry about that. But also sometimes on Saturdays. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah!